Everyone to the session at the Academy of Management on how organization theorists can tackle grand challenges. My name is Helen Etchanchu from Montpellier Business School. I co-organized this symposium together with Suhaib Riaz from the University of Ottawa. We are very pleased to be able to host the session today, which is on an issue that is close to our heart, and how organization theorists can tackle grand challenges is a very timely question that has increasingly gained attention in our scholarly community and also in society at large. So how can we actually transform our organizations, our economies, our communities to address grand challenges? So that's one of the big questions that our expert panels, the challenge that they've taken on with us today. Before introducing the panel, I would actually like to point out that we aim at walking our talk, so I'm very happy to also welcome our virtual audience that are following us live on the Organization Scientists for Future webpage. So we're actually video live streaming the session today in order to be more inclusive and also reduce our carbon emissions from our conferences. The online audience is also able to participate directly in the Q&A via Slido, and this is also why I would like to ask the audience physically present here to use the microphone later on as we engage in the Q&A discussion, so that the video is going to pick up on what you're saying. So now it's the time to actually present our panel experts. I'm very happy to have great scholars here who work on issues such as climate change, inequality, technological innovation, and strong institutions. So I'll start to left from you guys. It's Jennifer Howard-Grenville, who will be our moderator of the session from University of Cambridge, Joel Gehman from University of Alberta, Charlene Zietsma from Penn State University, and Johanna Mair from Hertie School of Governance, and last but not least, Gerald Davis from the University of Michigan. So the session, so first we're going to start to talk about theories, and the second part is going to talk about impact and how organization theorists can actually make a concrete impact on the different stakeholders. So in order to introduce the session on theories, I will ask Jennifer Howard-Grenville to make a short presentation to give us a brief overview of the field at the intersection of organization theory and grand challenges. Thank you.
Okay, and apologies because I walked about a mile from the Sheraton to just get here for my last session. So we, being on a panel up here, moderating these people who I admire, who have done incredible work over their careers on issues that we might now call grand challenges, and who have also contributed prior to me to using that term in published work. I think I just am going to frame very lightly and just refer to some of the awareness that I've had of the conversation around grand challenges. And this is the special issue that we ran when I was an associate editor at AMJ during 2013 to 16 under Jerry George, who was the editor-in-chief at that time. We had a theme in that journal to pick up again on the work of those of the panelists and others that were already doing this, and to really showcase and illustrate to others in the field that management and AMJ and basically our community in general is open for business in terms of thinking about doing work that can be in conversation with major challenging issues of the day. So really our goal throughout this 3-year term at AMJ was to open up some windows for those who might not have seen their work as contributing to issues like ethics, climate change, gender equality, age inequality, etc. So if you get the chance and if you're intrigued, you can go back and look at all those editorials that we wrote, typically with one member of the AMJ editorial team, in addition to, for example, I wrote one on climate change with 2 climate scientists who had contributed to IPCC reports, so I learned a great deal, and I think also our goal there was to just showcase what some possibilities were. Now, I just want to say, what do we mean by grand challenges? And I hope that the panel will have some conversation about this and you all will contribute, because I think we're in a moment now where the label has stuck. And probably if I were to ask all of you what the definition was, we probably have 73 different ones in this room, okay? So I prefer to think of it as a grand challenge, and this is what we said in the paper that I just showed you in the introduction to our special issue. We reminded people that the term grand challenge actually began way back when with David Hilbert, who was a German mathematician, who said, you know, if we as mathematicians solve this particular proof, this is the grand challenge, solving this proof. Why? Because it will unlock the ability to do mathematics that will be very powerful for us. We cannot advance further in certain areas of mathematics until we solve certain proofs. And so that was collectively, in fact there were 23 proofs or 23 problems, collectively termed grand challenges in the field of mathematics. I don't think we have that version of a grand challenge in our field. There is no one piece of theory or empirical evidence that any of you or any of us could write that will unlock the solutions to societal grand challenges. Nonetheless, I think what's really important about this analogy, and as we point out in our introduction, is it was an invitation to study certain things, an invitation as academics and as scholars to orient our attention towards certain kinds of problems. And that's really how I think about grand challenges, is basically throwing open the conversation among colleagues to say which things are in our domain and which things are important to us. And so the second piece, definitionally, is the Canadian organization that defines grand challenges as a family initiative fostering innovation on global health, certainly, and other issues. What I like about this is it draws attention to the idea that it's experimentation. So grand challenges are process, and approaches to grand challenges are experimental processes from which we ideally learn. And so for us, again, as academics, if we're invited into a conversation, we're not here to solve them. I think one of the most important messages around grand challenges is actually there's lots of people who've been studying these things from lots of different domains, and there's a huge amount of expertise out there. And we need to think about what can we as management and organization scholars bring to the question, okay? And how can we understand them? So just one sort of quick jump through what we're actually talking about. So I took that paper that I just showed you, that special issue, and of course there's been much written about robust action, there's been much written about wicked problems. We just took this one special issue just to see what's it caused. This is just a snippet from the spreadsheet. I had a MPhil student of mine who was incoming as a PhD sort of code it and say, you know, what has been citing this article and how is it being cited? At the time that she did this analysis, there were 130 Google Scholars citations that were sort of real Google Scholar citations, not just, you know, calls for papers or whatnot, and that included some business source ultimate citations. I checked last night, it's about 190 citations on Google Scholar to this paper, so this was done in March. It's a little old, but if we cut out some of the other stuff. So she got down to 79 actual journal articles in a subsample, and you can see the huge variety of journal articles in which these conversations have been picked up. You can also see on the left that actually, you know, frequency of occurrence is low because it takes a while to get papers in these kinds of journals, partly, and because it's such a diverse conversation. How are people actually using it? I won't go into detail, but basically most people cite it once and then move on. Either cite an article or cite the label, right? So invitation to a conversation, we're joining a conversation with a label. Are we joining a conversation that's coherent? That this was just sort of, you know, qualitative coding around some of the diversity of the empirical foci. So we went everywhere from what you'd expect on income inequality in some of these papers that we're citing this article, you know, gender and ethnic discrimination, refugee camps, you know, animal rights in factory farming and sports, spectator sport and population health, right? So it's a big, broad tent conversation. AMJ is a big, broad tent journal. That was probably the intent. For better or for worse, we started the conversation, and I'm just going to stop there, just having shown you a little bit of how it's starting to resonate. I think there's more to be said, and I'd really just love to dive into questions with the panel next. So, can we go straight down? Yes? Okay. Yeah? Oh. Okay. So the first question really that we posed to the panel, and I suppose was, you know, what's the exciting new work in this area, whatever area it might be? So, you know, what are some insights and lessons from stuff that you're seeing going on in this area? What's new, what's novel? Who shall I start with? Joel?
This was actually one of the hardest questions for me, so I don't So I guess I'll give a shout out to one paper that's come to my attention recently, which is Saving Our Oceans, Scaling the Impact of Robust Action Through Crowdsourcing. Amanda Porter, Philip Turcher, and Maureen Huseman. Are any of you in the room? No? Okay. So this is a really interesting take on how we can use crowdsourcing and open innovation to generate novel ideas that can potentially address issues around sustainability in the marine industry. And what I liked about this paper is the variety of the participants that are involved. So we have NGOs, we have big corporations. The shipping industry, as you know, is kind of historically almost monopolistic. And then we have these innovators and new emerging entrepreneurs coming into this ecosystem trying to bring ideas to bear. Two things that they did, which if you know the paper that I've done on robust action with Fabrizio Ferraro and Rory Tion, we talk about how one of the challenges is how do you sustain engagement and how do you generate novelty. And they turn these two things on their heads and they talk about how do you generate engagement and how do you sustain novelty. So I really liked the playfulness, and it was a kind of a duh when I read this. It's like, why didn't we think of that? So I just wanted to give a shout out to that one. More generally, I know there's a whole network of scholars in Europe around grand challenges that Ali Goumese has been organizing, and I just want to acknowledge that group. I don't know if anyone here in the room is part of that, but there's a whole network of scholars that are meeting, discussing early stage work. And then I'll just say one more thing, which is coming back to the definition of grand challenges. So in that paper that we did, we try to articulate three facets of what we think makes a grand challenge a grand challenge. So in addition to the sort of topics or the phenomena, for us it's three issues: complexity. It's difficult to predict what's going to happen in the next stage of the game. Uncertainty, even if I can do that, the game's going to change while the play is in progress. Those two things we think are well foregrounded in concepts like wicked problems. The third thing that we add is what we call evaluativity. And what we think is going on is even if we can get everybody to agree that poverty is a problem and we should solve it, red states and blue states, as a for instance, are going to have radically different ideas about what a solution looks like. And that evaluative piece has to be taken into consideration for me.
Terrific. I'm just going to build on from there. The article on robust action was actually quite helpful for me as well. And yesterday we had a nice panel organized by Melody Cartel and Eva Boxenbaum on collective experiments, which builds on that participatory architecture, very similar. And I think there's a lot of work that is now working on how do you get all sorts of different stakeholders into the room together to try to come up with some new proto-institutions that might manage their arrangements in a way that has less inequality and solve some grand challenges, maybe is more sustainable, whatever the particular grand challenge is. And a lot of the articles that are coming out really emphasize that when you get together like that, you can create all sorts of emotional energy and reflexivity just from talking to each other and exploring these challenges together. So even though you come with very different value systems, if you have a good architecture, you can actually talk to people, understand each other, listen to people most importantly, and start to come up with some very interesting ideas, some integrative ideas that can solve those problems, because you actually start to like and respect and pay attention to those other people. So I think that's been very helpful. The other thing that's been very dynamic for me, and something, well, Johanna, I think it was you who really pushed the idea that institutional voids are not voids, not void. They're full of other institutions. They're full of norms and informal or whatever operating systems and social relationships and things along those lines. And so I think one of the criticisms, maybe I'll say that because that's we have one of our questions on that, but one of the issues with trying to make interventions in context of poverty or context of inequality is that you really, really need to think about how do you work with people, not on people, and how do you enable, build capacity, how do you provide them with different insights from different locations so that they may become reflexive, but then design their own systems that work within that context, that fit the context. There's lots of issues around power. There's lots of issues on, you know, how do you deal with culture, different cultures, and dealing with inequality. But I think we're making a lot of progress working on empowering actors, and that's really exciting to see.
Thank you. Yeah, similar to Joel, this was the question where I struggled with, like, what to do, because I'm certainly not going to call out for the one paper that I really found fascinating, because there is actually a body of work that is out there now, and that's the exciting thing. There are a number of studies, and so for me the question is really, how do we harness this momentum? And Joel mentioned this group of actually early career scholars that formed the network in Europe. How do we harness this and not just leave it to individual paper writing, but actually build a stock of knowledge where organizational theories, organizing organizations are at the core, so that we actually also can have a seat on the table in conversations about really making impact. And impact for me is making progress on a social problem or societal challenge. But to do so, and I take the liberty to actually the green light to be provocative, I honestly think that we should move forward and actually consider the term grand challenges as an incredible, helpful label and tool, a label that was actually popularized, as you know, by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, as getting the excitement among management people. But let's move on and not just focus on a label, because if there's one thing that I learned from actually starting to do work on social enterprises, social entrepreneurship, in the beginning of the 2000s, the first piece that I read was by Paul Hirsch and Levin on umbrella concepts. And and this was for me, I never wanted to stick onto a label, same as here, because ultimately there will be a validity police that actually determines the life cycle. The work that I do basically is about social problems, it's about societal challenges. What's wrong with actually just kind of stick to that? Because this will also allow us for being in conversations, and it's the exciting thing for me to see this momentum, especially also among young scholars, is how we can actually engage with a broader set of social sciences, how we actually, in our smaller kind of area, how we revisit and re-engage theories of collective action you mentioned, how we think about how can we bring power back in new ways, and therefore also probe, test, recast existing theories. So the provocation in this one is like, to what extent we might be better off of really kind of also allowing the conversation beyond the label of grand challenge.
Thank you. And picking up on that, one of the things that I've been delighted to see is that we actually do have something useful to say. So I had the pleasure of being one of the guest editors of a special issue of Academy of Management Discoveries, led by the estimable Jennifer Howard-Grenville, who is our spiritual leader and moral force. And the topic of this issue was management contributions to the Sustainable Development Goals. The idea was, what does management research have to say that could advance the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals? And possibly this is just cognitive dissonance, but over time I've come to believe that if we just declared that the purpose of management research is to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, I would be delighted. I will quit now and just let the rest of you answer all the questions so I don't have to run any more regressions. But that feels to me like the right approach. Like, it would clarify a lot of things. Is this responsible and useful, or is this less responsible and less useful? SDGs are a really good way to organize how we think about management research. There's 169 underlying, there's metrics, businesses are on board. One of the weird things that you discover about the Sustainable Development Goals is every business in Europe can name exactly how they're contributing or not to every goal. and no business in the United States has ever heard of the SDGs, and they actually think it's something you learn about in health class, which feels weird, and deans don't love it. It's weird, the cultural difference between them. But when we announced this special issue, we ended up getting something like 70 submissions, the most submissions they've ever received, some great ones. We were overwhelmed by the quality of some of the work. I think we're publishing 8 or 9 of these papers coming soon, so watch out for those. And I'd say the big lesson for me for all of this was that we do have useful things to say, that organization theory is uniquely placed to make contributions, to understand the multiple levels of analysis, the interdependencies between them. Organization theory is like Indianapolis, all the highways meet. So we're like the disciplinary Indianapolis, where all these different fields can meet, and that's kind of what you need to take on grand challenges, is that multi-level interdisciplinarity.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, all of our panelists. That's fantastic. Starting with Joel, reminding us, the core features of grand challenges, that we can think of the nature of the problems. Also, ending with Jerry, that it is a problem, that there are problem-focused areas that have been labeled already for us, Sustainable Development Goals, and this notion that there needs to be participation, and we don't need to get hung up on labels. In fact, actually, the green chemistry paper I wrote was all about labeling and how did you deal with this label early in your field, and what, if there's one thing to be learned from that study, it totally echoes what Johanna was saying, which was when you get hung up on labels, you can oversee the fact that actually there's a diversity of work going on that's been enabled, and it's less about the label, it's more about actually bringing the work forward. So, so we can talk about labels later, but I do want to throw out to the audience the following challenge, which is, so there's lots of different ways to see this, and we should be in conversation with other communities, but I would like to know what you think. What is our value add as management and organizational scholars to these areas? What do we bring to the table? So take a moment, jot that down for yourself, and then I'm going to pick on a few people who are willing to say that, and then we will ideally have you. That's kind of a loser form of the second question, so you should be prepared. So you'll be ready, okay? But out to you. What do we bring to the table? Because it's big, it's messy, and we're not the only experts, and there's lots of stuff we could do. So, do we have anything that's special? Go. Think. Dot. Okay, I need 4 to 5 people who are willing to offer. What do we, what's our unique value add? In the middle, yes.
So I think instead of thinking about how management scholars as a group that can offer, maybe we think as an individual, what can we offer? What are we passionate about? What is our unique skill set? What kind of problems or people we are more able to leverage and to solve? That's just my thoughts.
So our unique point might not be a theoretical one, it might be an access one.
It might be a theoretical access practice, maybe art,
Okay.
maybe
Okay, so we're going to go tell other disciplines that we're good because we can do a lot of stuff. Okay? Let's get more specific. Ralph. That's fine.
So I think what we can contribute is a strong theoretical tradition as a double-edged sword. So I work with climate scientists and others, and they really find it useful that when they grapple with organizational change, for instance, how do we get a municipality to think about climate change? And then they come to us and we can talk to them. Well, we've got this amazing decades-long conversation on that kind of thing, and I think they feel very excited about that. At the same time then, however, if we then bring just a very quick vignette on that, we submitted a paper on companies contributing to community resilience, and we used the term ecosystem. And one reviewer kept going on about the kind of ecosystem from a strategy point of view, and totally misunderstood that we were actually talking about real ecosystems. Let's just talk about it. So we kind of, I think, because we have that tradition of strong theory, we get a bit trapped in our own bubble of seeing the world through those theoretical terms.
So that's a double-edged sword. Okay, so we have some unique ways of seeing the world, and we have a more sophisticated lens on what organizing and organizations are than some of our peers in other disciplines. Okay, let's keep going. These two more.
Yes.
Going some of what we've heard from Charlene and others. Okay, one or two more.
So, I believe it would be a bit typical, what I would say. So, to understand what we can do, I think first we have to understand as a management scholars what we have done wrong by producing the theories that we have developed and taught to the management students. That reminds me the paper of Samantha Ghoshal, who has been making controversy after that. So as a management scholars, we need to reform those theories and need to teach those theories in a more meaningful way that the students can learn and we can also contribute in the positive way. So we need to rearrange all the theories that we have developed.
So we might feel good about our superior theorizing, but we talk funny, and others need to understand us, okay? Great. I think we have time for one more. Yeah,
I would like to point out that management and organization scholars can be very good at looking what people actually do at practice and what's actually happening and what explains that, and engage also with the messiness and complexity and uncertainty that define grand challenges.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for the audience interaction. And now we are going to turn to the panel. What do we really add as organizational scholars in your view? Who wants to start? Johanna? Now we're dealing with core instead of the wire.
The reason why I wanted to start is because I wanted to actually just build on what you said. I think there's obviously our expertise in what Jennifer said on organizations, and organizing will help us also, provides us with a repertoire, a theoretical repertoire, a methodological repertoire to understand how we can make progress on a particular social problem. But I also do believe that it helps us to understand why we don't make progress on particular problems. And even more so, why we actually amplify or perpetuate certain social problems. So this is, I give you an example, in the work that I do with John Ames and Kamal Mair, we're trying to understand how organizations and organizational practices, what we do in organizations, actually perpetuate inequalities. So one thing is that we can take stock of how inequality is manifested and biases creep in through organizational practices, such as hiring, how tasks are assigned. But work has been done in a lot of disciplines. But what we can add is actually understand why that is so, and basically problematize the organization per se, not as a neutral, rationalized system, but there are certain myths that we actually associate with organizing, such as efficiency, such as meritocracy, such as globalization, that then perpetuate. And that goes back to your remark, and Sumatra was actually the person who actually pushed me into academia, so I appreciated your comment, but it also goes back to the idea that we cannot just kind of think about our role as researchers, but also as educators. Because these myths of organizing that perpetuate inequality, we actually nurture them in our teaching.
All that, and what you said earlier about the intersection that all roads lead to org theory, I think are all really critical issues. The other thing I just want to push on is the fact that business is everywhere and they're in the midst of many social problems and often exacerbating them. And we know business. And so paying attention to business and paying attention to how it influences these situations is actually really important. And I think, we've lost sight of the idea that business is actually supposed to serve society versus society serving business. So we need to really take ourselves back out of that. I also appreciated the comment about Sumatra Ghoshal's provocative article. had my own personal experience with that, where I was addressing an audience that was focused on corporate social responsibility, and I said something about, you know, maybe we need to talk to our entrepreneurs and our business people that maybe growth is not the right thing, that we should really think twice about growth. And I got shocked reactions, just outrage. So, so, you know, we have to think about what kind of an impact are we having on the field because of our situatedness in business schools. In addition, though, we teach strategy, we teach innovation, we know about strategy and innovation, we know about building market power. We can turn those skills to good use. You can build market power for social movements, for organizations that are for good. So I think, you know, there's a lot of things that we can potentially add.
This chord thing is going to end in tragedy. So far, we're good. Rosa Luxemburg's most famous book was called Reform or Revolution, and my feeling is, why not both? So within the realm of capitalist enterprises, reform is how do we fix Walmart from the inside out? How do we fix Google from the inside out? How do we sort of repair these things that are probably not going to go away of their own accord? The revolution part is how do we create new kinds of enterprises that might be more democratic, more humane, that might serve human needs a bit better. There's also a list of companies that I would give the death penalty to, but some are recruiters and some are what I'm thinking there. But if you think of sort of the big challenges we all face now, climate is an existential threat, inequality, racism, the health of democracy, healthcare access. In every case, corporations and social movements are central actors in how those things happen. Those are the critical actors that we need to take on, and I feel that we are, in some sense, uniquely placed to sort of think through what those actors are like and to find the critical leverage points. Where is it that you can make a difference? So if any of you want to take a sabbatical to do some good in the world, in the last several months, we've seen employee-led social movements within Salesforce, Wayfair, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, where employees are saying, we do not want to contribute to this kind of activity that the firm is doing. We respectfully want to see this change. This feels like a great opportunity for those of us that study social movements and organizations to say, hey, we might have some thoughts for you about how to make sure, how to sort of raise your voice in there. So that would be one thought about a practical way to take on some of the biggest actors in the economy.
Last but not least, Joel's thoughts on our value add.
Yeah, I guess, so on Friday I helped organize the OMT Junior Faculty Consortium. One of the speakers was Mark Petreska, and he made a kind of quip, which but really resonates with me, which is a lot of these problems are not technical. We actually already know how to solve the problem technically. And it is you know, a lot of them were governance related. I would expand that a little bit, you know, more broadly and say they're problems of organization. And we know a thing or two about that. There are issues of, you know, at the ground level, how do we change practice? What do we do about cultural embedding? You know, at a larger scale, how do we generate legitimacy for, you know, new ways of living, new modes of living? You know, one of the examples I use with my MBA students is like, well, it would be better for the world if we didn't all shower every day. But I've been brought up to believe that the hygienic thing to do is to shower every day. So if I come along with a device that says, you know, you're going to stand in front of a machine and it will radiate you, and that will get rid of the germs and you'll smell good. I could have that device, but the problem is how do I get it to be taken up in the culture? Because I will think I'm not clean. So a lot of this stuff, we have something to contribute. I think we're tremendously impactful on our students. I guess the other way that I think we can contribute is by training up a generation of leaders who realizes it's okay to care about this stuff. You know, that's a big part of what I think I do in my classrooms is give people permission to bring your values to work. And it's okay.
So we have to feel a whole lot better about ourselves right now, yeah? Okay. We have something to add, not just in research, but in teaching, in how we are in the world, and how we orient to organizations. But I think, at least from the organizers and the material that they put together in organizing this symposium, the idea of grand challenges is not without critics. I remember talking to Sue Ashford a few years ago, again when we were presenting the work on green chemistry, and we were saying, you know, the only people who objected to green chemistry were chemists themselves, because it made their non-green chemistry look evil. The only, you know, people object to positive organizational scholarship because that maybe implies to some people who would feel threatened that they're doing negative organizational scholarship. So, you know, so are there critiques you have heard around the label, the idea, the problem focus, the characteristics of grand challenges, and being a management researcher working on them? I'm just gonna literally, I want like 2 or 3 hands. Are there any critiques that you're hearing or have heard that you'd like to share? And then I'm gonna take it back to the panel. No? Okay, we're good. Yeah, no, there's one over there.
Don't know if that's exactly what you're asking, but I have a question for the panel, which is, I'm extremely inspired by the issue of grand challenges like everybody else, and I can see the potential. But on the other hand, we have a lot being written also since 2017 and 2018 about how little we care in business schools about all this, and how little performance management in business schools are about that, how much we care much more about whether a handful of people cite us, as opposed to the kind of impacts we have for global sustainability goals and so forth. So my question to you guys is, what do we need to change in business schools for this to actually be more talk?
So less a criticism on the research on grand challenges, but more criticism on we as business school faculty and business schools in general doing research which essentially feeds our citations and makes us feel good, and occasionally we read each other's work, but actually what's that doing in the world? So a valid criticism of the enterprise that I think many of us share and resonate with. Any other criticisms that you're hearing? Yes?
So I've just been wondering about when we talk about grand challenges and we try to investigate these grand challenges with the same toolkit that we have been using up till now, and with the same fundamental concepts and things that we have out there, how do we expect to land up at a different place? I would like to draw a simile between the East and the West way of thinking, or the shareholder-stakeholder arguments. We may have the shareholder value system that at least gives us a target of profits. But when we talk about all the alternative competitions that are there, we don't have a systematic or a comprehensive way of addressing this part, so we have a moving target around the place. So if you look at grand challenges, until we don't fix this universal target as to what we are trying to aim for, we will be all over the place with no coherence.
So as Johanna said, you know, some of our theory actually helps us see why these problems perpetuate, but we maybe shouldn't be so high on our theory in terms of its ability. You know, you can't see something new with these same tools. Yeah, let's go one and then, yeah, two more, yeah, keep it going.
Hi, I'm Tracy Van Willem from the Center for Sustainable Business at NYU, and I come originally from the field of sustainability. My degree is in interdisciplinary ecology. I study anthropology and geography, and what I see in my struggle is that people have been working on these grand challenges in these other disciplines, and my sort of mental challenge is how to bring that world together with the business world. So I'm all up for ideas, but I haven't quite figured out how to do it yet. But I imagine there are a lot of scholars out there that are like, hey, wait a minute, we've been doing this for 30 years. So I think we need to speak to them in some way. I don't know how.
Great, okay. And this one. Over here. Wait, oh, sorry.
I'm just a message from the Krakow University of Economics, and I'm doing interdisciplinary research. I came here to get an answer about theory, because for me, what my main challenge is that I'm looking is that how broad the management theory should go. Because we look, let's say here now we have 10,000 people. I understand that when 10,000 medical doctors are meeting that they are talking left kidney, right kidney, specialists of different of two kidneys. My point is, to what extent the management theory should be broad? For instance, when I read the text, on the one hand, and as I said, I know a little bit about interdisciplinarity, because I'm background. On the one hand, somebody's writing on the direct applications of quantum mechanics in management theory, not metaphors, but direct. And on the other hand, we have advanced applications of Michel Foucault. So this is my first question, how broad? And then how deeply we should go with theory. If I understand theory in a classical positivism, no-positivist sense, when the main aim is prediction, So, of course, I don't expect any ready-made, any instant answers. But this is my point in one of the projects I'm working on, because sometimes it looks that there is a kind of eigendynamic of the community of management scholars, just to develop the new topics, just to get the positions. Thank you very much.
Yeah, okay, so thank you. I think that wrapped full circle, right? Because that relates to the original question of, are we just writing theory for ourselves, and are we inventing new theory to keep us in business? So Jerry, since you're usually so positive about things, I'm going to hand the mic to you first on the topic of criticism about Grand Challenge. And really, the question posed is, how do we address criticisms of work in this area? And let's keep it in theory. We're going to switch to impact very soon. How do we engage with the criticisms of our work on Grand Challenges, and specifically also potentially, how do we use those to actually drive our work forward? And the criticisms, again, have been criticisms of the enterprise, not just a particular theory, so take it wherever way you want.
No, I love the last question, because I've been thinking a lot about how things can go terribly wrong when you take theories designed to explain American corporations and then apply them everywhere in the world. So a big part of what smart Alex might call the neoliberal project is the idea that if only we install a stock market in every country in the world, then entrepreneurs will come out of the woodwork, and it'll be just like Shark Tank everywhere on Earth, Guatemala and Egypt, and there'll just be it'll be Silicon Valley everywhere, driven by shareholder value. And I'll just summarize, that didn't work out the way they expected. But more broadly, there are no universal solutions, and that organization theory as a discipline needs to be inherently comparative, because the right solution in one place is not the right solution everywhere in the world. So think about architecture. How should you build a house? It would be insane to say, here's the right way to build a house, and it works in Sweden, and it works in Nairobi, and it works in Australia. It's not going to be like that. You've got local conditions, you've got different building materials, different aesthetic senses, and so, first do no harm in this case would be, don't take the one theory and the one answer and apply it everywhere. So just being sensitive to sort of the cross-national comparisons, and how we need to be more, I think, thoughtfully comparative about how we create solutions, and to sort of honor local knowledge when creating these things. So we have some good general principles, but it's got to be adapted locally in a way that I think contradicts. Business schools tend to love the glib. We really love to have MBA student groups break into discussion sections for 30 minutes and then emerge with a solution for world hunger. And it'll look really good on a PowerPoint presentation, but it's possible that actually won't be sufficient. I think we just need to get more used to more depth and more detailed contact and more local knowledge.
I find it actually ironic that I could guess that a lot of criticism towards this work that we are doing is that it's not so theoretical. And I think that's actually, I would turn it exactly the way around, because for me, studying organizations that address a social problem or societal challenge actually holds me true to actually develop theory that is meaningful, but also that I have a way to actually make sure that organizational theory has some impact on other disciplines. We are so good in management science and organizational theory to borrow from others. You mentioned the physics thing, and if we steal and borrow and integrate that in what we do, if that's theory, well, I don't know. But what I find, I'm probably more a conservative person because I love the work of Goldner, of Selznick. I love if you think about Durkheim or Weber, the way they developed their theories was definitely in the context of a particular societal challenge or a particular social problem. So that keeps me grounded. But I would really also love to pick up on Jerry's point, because one of the reasons why I study social problems is because studying organizations that address social problems allows us to really do the necessary comparative work also across different institutional contexts. I'm looking at my friend Ute Stefan, with whom I have done also this work, and with other colleagues, where we are trying to understand how do social enterprises in 9 different countries differ, actually, depending on the social problems and societal challenges that manifest in those. And is there something like a global architecture, an archetype, and how is organizing different? Also because organizations actually who deal with social problems are expected to differ from each other, right? And that allows us to actually carve out the conversation with political economy, for example. And I think if a measure of success for me in this conversation around grand challenges is how many people in the different social sciences are going to read our papers and cite our papers.
Okay, I'll go off on a little bit of a different tangent because for too many years I got the message on from reviewers, this is not a suitable topic for a management journal, or please tell us why this is a suitable topic for a management journal. And I want to thank Jerry and Jennifer and others for really laying the groundwork for us so that we could start to address these problems in a more legitimated way, I guess. Do I think that we're too theoretical? We are pushed to build that theoretical contribution. I like theory. I like to think about how can we actually extend theory, but I think we can do it by probing in very different contexts, comparing them across institutional settings, being aware of how local contexts affect things. And we can probably know more. One of the things I've been working on lately with some others is looking at how do you build the capabilities to be a better institutional intervener in multiple contexts. How is that possible to actually do better? And of course, the sensitivity to the context is a huge aspect of that. So I do think that there is a role for theory. I do think our incentive structures in business schools are, we're in the business of building research careers, which means we have to follow the rules of the journals, and the journals are pushing in a different way for theoretical contribution. So far, I've been able to say, well, let's try to do both, but yet it'd be nice if we created more impact measures and we considered more about how to influence the world. I think a lot of countries are actually starting to do that at a national level, starting to demand more impact from their scholars. So we'll see how that goes.
I'll try to take up 2 things here. So I guess I'm the youngest scholar in terms of my time in the field here. I'm most recently tenured. And I guess all I would say is, you can do this. This is all I do. It's too bad that you have found, people saying this is not a good topic for management research. I've never had a paper rejected for that reason. They get rejected for plenty of other reasons, but it's not because I pick topics that people don't want to read about. So, to all the young scholars out there, or people who are thinking about making some kind of transition, this is what you want to do. Go do it. Life is a choice, and you can do that. So that would be one thing. I wanted to come back to the question over here about how broad or how deep. So my inspiration here is Michel Calan, and he has this quote, which I don't know if I have it verbatim here. He says, "The task of the analyst is, in alliance with other actors, to multiply possible worlds." Okay, so that's my job. My job is to help people have new ways of seeing things. So how much theory? I don't know. How many new ways do we need to see the problem? And as long as my new theoretical contribution allows you to have some new vantage point on the problem and might mobilize action in some way that wasn't possible before, then the theory is useful for me. To the extent that I'm not helping you see the problem in some new way and we're just kind of carving it up in some other little minuscule way, then I think, okay, maybe that's not a good use. So it's not Foucault for Foucault's sake, or it's not quantum theory for quantum theory's sake, but if that somehow allows me to elucidate this problem in a way that you get it, in a way that you didn't before, then I think that's theory worth having.
Fantastic. Who knew theory could be so exciting? We've used up a significant amount of time on the sort of theory end of things. We're about to reorient, but I think I just want to wrap up and sort of echo some of the themes, which is theory for theory's sake. We don't need any more of that. Theory is rigor. Theory is disciplined thinking. The reason it's so hard to get your papers into top journals, and the reason we all get rejected so frequently, is because it's tough to do it, right? We really have to push each other. And I think what the message that I'm getting from this too is that when we do push each other, and when we push each other in a way that is also responsible to the issues that we're seeing, to their local manifestations and to the variation within them, and we don't try to oversimplify, and we don't give you 3 keys to success, we actually give you something useful but deep and thoughtful, then we can be helpful. And I'm reminded also of Johanna's work with Christian that talks about being mindful of when we're working in settings that are truly challenging, when there's vulnerable populations, the worst thing we can do is give them bad advice or a theory or bad theory, right? And there's a lot of it out of there. I just came from a session on circular economy. That's a buzzword that's getting all sorts of people excited about how much money they can make by recycling and selling more stuff, right? So, we need to be those people who actually bring a more disciplined and rigorous way of thinking and looking at the complexity of it. So, fantastic. So, celebrate theory, and we're going to sort of now switch gears to the part 2. On the question of impact, because we can pat ourselves on the back again for exploring questions, exploring them rigorously, but if all we ever do is publish them in a top journal, we have a very hard time defending usually that they have impact. It's fantastic that your work is getting picked up in other disciplines, but I think most of us dream of that. So can you share an example of the best ways that you've seen scholars, either yourself or others, make a concrete impact? And it can be any kind of impact with different stakeholders, and when they're doing the research on grand challenges. So what are some positive examples we have out there?
Just a few things that, some initiatives that I think have been really cool. I'll give a shout out to Tima Bonsel's Network for Business Sustainability. It's a really neat group that is very deeply connected to practice and has interaction points between practice and scholars and helps to translate scholarly work to practice. The practice people are putting down their money for a board seat on this, so they are demanding that they could get good value out of this. And I think that's a really good thing to have that kind of integration. I think that Stephanie Bertels is doing something similar with her embedding project, where she's looking at how do you embed sustainability into organizations at all levels. And she's got a lot of companies that have signed up to work with her on this because they're interested in embedding sustainability at a number of levels. So that's terrific. I got some advice recently from Leanne Lefsrud. Leanne, you're probably here, right? Yeah, they're right there. And she has the most cited paper in organization studies ever, or I think popular press citations. And it was hugely popular, and it was a climate change paper, and she sent it to a climate change denier media outlet in order to get the the conversation going, and it went like wildfire. So, sorry, I passed out your secret. I hope that's okay. But yeah, really good idea. I've seen a friend, Ben Kishore, has done a lot of work in, he's a political scientist, but he does work in non-state market-driven governance. And he consults with governments all over the world who are trying to solve these governance issues on key social issues. So wonderful. Of course, I love the work Johanna's doing in so many different domains. I think the impact that we as scholars make in the research process, we can't deny as well. So if we're out there doing qualitative research, we're touching people, we're affecting the context as we go, and we're learning from them, and they're learning from us at the same time. Michael Mann is a preeminent climate scientist from Penn State, and he's had lots of frustration over the years in dealing with climate change denial. He started writing children's books as a means of reaching out to the next generation. In doing interviews with clean tech entrepreneurs, I talked to one biofuel from compost entrepreneur who said he could not get enough compost. And so what he did is he went out to all the grade 4 classrooms in his entire city and taught them how the importance of compost, and they all shamed their parents into composting. And it happened. He got his supply. So, you know, there are multiple ways we can make impact, and I think we should all think about those.
Actually, I want to build on that, and I love the story about Leanne sort of getting the word out about her work to the climate deniers. I think one of the ways that we can have an impact, the obvious way is we do consulting, or we show up and give speeches to industry groups, or we do action-based research within firms, and that's all wonderful, and we can call to mind examples of that. Thinking about marketing professors that were helping Purdue Pharmaceuticals by coming up with a really cool way to make their product go viral. So there's a lot of ways to influence practice for better or worse. Sorry, I go straight to the dark side. But there is a role for what we do that I think of as education for democratic choice. And what I mean by that is explaining in plain English to people that are decision makers, like broad decision makers, here's the way the world works and why we might want to go in this direction. So getting something into the hands of the press, getting 4th graders to shame their parents. There are a lot of instances where we know what the right answer probably is, and the trick is, how do we get there? Like, how do we get people to be irradiated rather than to take showers? Let's say that's a good idea. That is a role for academia, that in some sense we can be these sort of neutral or relatively, unbiased referees that can share knowledge with the broader world to help them better understand the context around some decision. So I am wondering, why is there not, so in the US we don't have the normal industrialized world's healthcare system. We have this sort of weird system rooted in the 1950s where employers provided health insurance. And also, at the same time that this has become more and more of a crisis, rates of entrepreneurship have been collapsing. They're like half the rate that they were 40 years ago. And it seems to me that if we had a single-payer healthcare system, you'd see a lot more entrepreneurship, because 25-year-olds would not fear what would happen if they went out of business. It's a very business-friendly proposition, but it isn't conveyed that way. Like, how do we take understandings from our research and convey them to the population in a way that they go, oh, that makes a bunch of sense, that the audience is really sort of the voting population or the decision-making population. If we can make what we understand to be clear to them, that can help, nudge policy in a particular direction. So it's a different take than working directly with businesses. It's like education for democratic choice.
Apologies if I will not have so many business examples, and that's simply due to the fact that I'm the only one here who's not in a business school. So, but nevertheless, I want to build on what I've heard before and just echo what Charlene said. I think there is not just one way of how you can impact, and she mentioned a number of amazing colleagues that do it their way, right? And we will also continue in this direction because I know which questions will come. So I just wanted to share a few learnings. So, and that these were not strategic decisions that I took in my career, but turned out to be actually quite useful, so it might be helpful. So, and one is actually to write a book. Write a book after you've done work for 15 years, in our case, Christian and my work in the field for 15 years, working with organizations, really deeply understand the problems that they're working on, and us always trying to understand how can we possibly give back to them. They shared everything. The reason why we spend so much time with them is because you really open them up and earn their trust that they share what doesn't work. Right? And you learn to understand the problem, the context. And we thought we will write a book to give closure to our 15 years and move on to another topic, but also to give back. Because one thing that we realized, we studied these organizations that address really stubborn, complex problems, and some of them are earn their own income, but many of them also rely on funds, because some of the social problems you have no market solution, right? And what we really realized, the funders, they have no idea about the organizational realities, let alone about really the problem space. So what we decided to do is in the book to develop a number of diagnostic tools that help organizations to reflect on what they are doing. Organizations are busy in their day-to-day. They don't step back in the evening and reflect about what they have done. That's our job and how we can help them, right? But at the same time, when they have a dialogue with their funders, they don't tell them, oh, this really didn't work and we have no idea why it didn't work. No, they give them the spiel. If the funder wants innovation in the proposal, they give them innovation. These days, if they want, the funders want systems change in the proposal, they give them systems change, right? So we understood there is a disconnect. And by developing some diagnostic tools as communication tools, for example, one is problem spaces as Joel mentioned, specifying the problems is very important. I studied for 15 years toilets, open defecation. You can look at open defecation in India as a technical problem. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has looked at it as we just don't have the right toilets. Otherwise, we could get rid of open defecation. They spent 500 million in competition about the best toilets. But open defecation in India is a relational problem. It's entrenched in religious norms, right? So you need to help the funder to understand, yes, you can push sanitation in the world, but you might leverage your portfolio by actually funding a technical solution, but also relational solution. Relational solution will take much more time to actually see impact. Another diagnostic is innovation pathologies. What derails organization from a productive path, from innovation to impact? Innovation is an investment. Innovation doesn't create a social value. Scaling creates value, but innovation and scaling have to hang together from the goggles of an organization. So we ourselves were always surprised how the organizations themselves love these diagnostics when we tested with them. When I teach at the Kennedy School here, once a year, a group of social enterprises, I was surprised this last round that I wanted to do the innovation pathology workshop, and people said, well, we did that in our organization last week because in the yearly retreat we tried to find out what should we actually do as a team. And I think that's, for me, a nice way as impact as counterfactual, what we have not done. So that's the way I personally think about impact. Another way is to what extent are the insights we develop portable? I got a lot of pushback early on in my career, and I was 10 years before your time. The first paper we submitted about Egypt was reviewers back 6 months after we submitted. Why should we care about Egypt, right? 10 years after, we were able to publish Bangladesh papers. So the portability, and here I want to come back to the importance of theorizing. I deeply believe our impact as scholars is incredibly amplified by our rigor about theorizing, right? And that makes us distinct, the quality of our thinking, the quality of our work, getting to the mechanisms. And it's the mechanisms that are portable. We were, quite frankly, very surprised how our work on India and Bangladesh was actually relevant to social welfare organizations in Germany here, Wohlfahrtsverbände, these very kind of old traditional ones. So I think there's a lot we can do, and we can find our own ways of doing it. There's not one best way.
Okay, Joel, just briefly.
Yeah, I'm just told to be brief. So I'm going to make two specific examples. So I study B corporations. One of the things that I've observed there is a group of academics that are mobilizing MBA students to help certify more B corporations. There are 20 chapters in the United States that are doing this at least. One of the people who really is blazing a trail here is Jessica Thomas at NC State, and she's essentially provided a set of materials that allow this process to diffuse. You could say that she's an institutionalist in that sense. She doesn't probably even know that theory, but that's what she's doing. So it's wonderful. The other point I was going to mention is I used Jennifer Howard-Grenville's work on championing to teach my MBA students how to build a coalition of the willing in your organization. So I think it's incredibly relevant work, and I think all of us could do it. Probably many of you are. So.
That was great. Thank you, Joel. Thank you, everyone. So lots and lots of different fantastic examples. I'm taking notes. I'm learning a ton on impact and how you can have impact. We are going to come back to the panel in a few more moments on the key question of the question was posed as, do we need to become academic activists? And I would say, actually, probably a number of you already have. But I'm going to twist the question of what we tell sort of people at different stages of their career about how to enact that. But before we do that, we're going to hand the mic back over to the audience. So we have a few more minutes to just gather the questions that you have that we haven't answered, or that we haven't even thought of or spoken about right now, or things that have just come up through the conversation. So what is on your mind? Rick here, yeah.
Hi, so thank you very much. This was really interesting. My question is about examples about teaching, because I think impact comes so much even through teaching. We were in a workshop last year in critical management. We really thought about it. So if you gave example, especially for undergrads, especially young early scholars do not teach that much to MBAs, which are great examples, but even for undergrads or master, which become more classic courses that after a while maybe don't care that much. And in fact, you are actually teaching hundreds and hundreds of people. So how do you embed ethics? How do you embed alternative organization? Or the great example of empowering social movements? I don't know, any example is welcome. Thank you.
Who wants to take that? Just one person.
We do one quick question.
Oh, yep.
Wisdom last.
Connects a little bit to what has been said already. Being a young scholar, how can the academic system look like that you actually encourage young scholars as me or us in order to really do research that has an impact and not be punished in order to translate current research instead of just publishing the next paper that needs to go out that nobody reads outside of our bubble, and that I have to come every year to the academy leaving a big CO2 footprint. So how can we actually really change the academic system that we are encouraged to do what we want to do?
The cognitive load, let's just keep those two, and so you're going to speak to teach our.
I mean, my basic premise in the classroom all the time, and so it's just the only hammer I swing, is you have to be able to see things multiple ways. So everything I do is about meta-theoretical thinking, or if you use the Pogge quote, a way of seeing is a way of not seeing. What I try to do is get them to see one way, and then I try to undermine it by getting them to see another way. And I do it in any class I teach, whether it's sustainability or intro to management. That's my trick. I don't know.
Yeah, I think exposing people to what it actually feels like to be in situations. So for undergrads, if you can really get them working with people working on social problems, that's great. But otherwise, really rich case studies, multimedia, getting them to think about things. In terms of young scholars and impact, again, you can do impact through the research that you choose to do. So action research, I think as an academy, we have to be more interested in action research, especially if we can push it to theoretical implications. But I also think as universities, we need to say, let's enable impact more by having a mechanism to help translate research, an institutional mechanism. So those of us who are really good at theorizing, but not so good at speaking to the public, can have somebody else help us craft the public message as well, or craft it for us.
Let me check if we have any other questions before we keep going. Yeah, why don't you grab another one?
Hi, Philip Yulfa from Alt University. So I have a question to follow up on your comment. How close do you think organization scholars should work with journalists and international press?
So I know personally it's not my favorite thing to do, but I would think that there should be some institutional mechanism that allows the interaction with journalists and international press. I think if we can get the word out in some way that is a little bit more controlled than the diet fads and that kind of thing, then that really helps. But we can write blogs. That maybe is something that's easier for us to do, or other mechanisms. But I think the press is a key part of it, actually.
Well, I am probably not the best person to answer this because I don't understand your question. Why wouldn't you talk to the press if you have something to say? Who of us wouldn't like to have an op-ed, and if we have something to say, we better say that. So no, I wanted to actually say something different. Not something different, but there are also, think about more intermediate ways to make your work accessible to others, and that's where I'm speaking as the academic editor of a magazine that's Stanford Social Innovation Review, that's actually curating content that you produce in a more journalistic way. My team, they are journalists, right? And they basically make sure that your voice is actually accessible and is read. And I think that's very important. I mean, I got a lot of pushback for doing this work 8 years ago, 10 years ago, because I was not seen credible as a scholar. But I think we now have the best supporter of SSR next to me, so I think we are beyond that, right?
We missed a question about what is it that we can do for junior scholars, or how could we change the incentive system to enable this kind of work. And I can't go to any one of these panels without and fail to mention RRBM, Responsible Research in Business and Management. You should all go to rrbm.network right this second and join our sinister global social movement / conspiracy, where the aim is to change what journals publish, what promotion and tenure committees evaluate, what the accreditors look at, and we're making some real progress. We've got allies in finance, accounting, marketing, management, operations, strategy. We held a summit in Rotterdam, which is where Jennifer got that beautiful plastic water bottle down there at the end from Erasmus University. And it's a
RBM Penn.
yes. It is but it's a big movement that's got over 1,000 co-signers, and we've got deans and journal editors who all see this same problem and are trying to move not just management, not just OMT, but all the business fields in the direction of doing more responsible research to take on grand challenges and come up with research that's useful for society. So that doesn't help you for your next 6-month review. But the hope is that in the fullness of time, this will change what all the business schools do, that it will sort of change the gravitational field for the work that we do. Of course, my secret hope is Sustainable Development Goals. That is what business research is for. I'm not going to win on that, but it's not a terrible aspiration, I think. Also, Stanford Social Innovation Review rocks, published there frequently. It's a great thing.
Okay, so I think, do we have one more burning question, I guess? One more burning question. Okay. discussion. But I'm so glad Jerry mentioned RRBM because I sketched that down, and SSIR I would have sketched down, but you beat me to it, Johanna. So I think the thing that I find helpful is to realize often we feel like we're not individually doing enough, or we're not doing it right, or we're not doing what we ought to be doing. And I think the panelists have shown us there's lots of ways to do this, and we need to be comfortable with what we are capable and able and energized to do. Joel knows that I'm still dragging myself backwards into Twitter, and I felt guilty about it for like 5 years not being on Twitter, because I feel like I should have impact that way. And I've suddenly realized that I can do other things, and I am getting a Twitter account. I just messed it up. So it's going to help me. but for example, just to add to the multiple ways that we can all be aware of the other things that are going on around us, so we don't have to do it all. We do our bit, and we trust that there's other ways that they can connect. So even AMJ, the state-owned journal, which I am now back with for another 3 years as deputy editor, has, in the time that I've been gone, developed AMJ Insights, where it has journalists working to translate your AMJ paper into a short piece of several hundred words that people might actually read. Now, they're all housed on the AMJ website, which isn't, got as many hits as some websites on the planet, but they also do actively push them out to the media. So even state-old print journals are getting the message. So I think what we all need to orient towards is we can all do a part. It doesn't need to be the same part. And in the next decade, a lot is going to change. One of the things that came up in this meeting in Rotterdam was people saying, well, how do we measure our impact when all of these wonderful things change in the system? And this, you could do sort of, 2030, we could be counting downloads from journals. And I was like, we won't download anything. We'll just stare into each other's eyes and see knowledge, right? So we old people don't want to create some envisioned future that you all are going to thrive in, because we're like missing the mark if we're talking about journal downloads in 10 years as being, sort of the key way that we do stuff. So on that note, I would like to invite you each to have a very brief comment, because Suhaib is going to come and wrap up on us in a moment. Very brief comment on how, what is your call to action for junior scholars, senior scholars, anyone in this room? How can they become an important voice in the field of grand challenges, or an academic activist if they so wish to? And the mic landed with Jerry, so you go first.
All right, so don't be afraid of activism. I think Joel's career is actually exemplary in this way. You don't have to do lame stuff on boards of directors or whatever like I do. There's actually a lot of, it is both cool to your fellow scholars to do work that's on grand challenges, and also you have things to talk to when you go home for the holidays and talk to your family and explain that you are studying, like Corinna Fry, you're studying refugee camps and making a difference. It's good for us, it's good for the world. I think the wind is at your back. In 5 years, we'll look back and say, what were we thinking, evaluating work that had no impact on the real world? So I think we're heading into that. You could just make it happen faster by writing your dissertation on something useful, and then tweeting about it, and then writing a Stanford Social Innovation Review piece for practitioners.
I think you just, as a junior scholar or early scholar, you just need to be yourself and think about that you have a career in front of you, and at different points in your career there will be opportunities to engage in different ways with what you find as impactful work. I don't think that we all need to be activists. I cannot be an activist, but there are a number of colleagues who are. I'm thinking about Gail, who couldn't be here. I mean, she's camping during Davos in a tent, and brings then people like Bruno Le Maire to see her, and I think we all can have our role. It can be the question you ask as a junior scholar. It could be by the methods you use. It could be how you translate the research into your teaching. There are so many ways of how you can do it, and there's no excuse not starting right from the beginning, especially when it comes down to the questions that you ask. I think the theoretical work that we're doing is actually better if it's grounded in a relevant question.
And I'm going to build on that and say I believe a lot in passion. Passion for some of these topics, it's a lot easier to generate your own passion for these topics. You feel like you're doing something important and valuable and interesting. And when you have a lot of passion for something, you do better work. You engage more deeply, you spend the time, you are more productive. And so I think it's a win-win. So go do what you're passionate about.
Yeah, I think we'll probably start to sound a little bit like a broken record, but my take on this is, I guess, we have a tremendous amount of autonomy, right? We get to do pretty much anything we want. All we have to do is produce new knowledge that meets the bars that our peers set when we send it out to journals. That's the job. But you can produce virtually any kind of new knowledge you want. So I guess the way that I think about it is you have to have the courage to risk yourself, you know? And that's what I've tried to do. You know, what that means for you is an individual choice. You have to decide what that looks like. You know, I think, and everybody's going to answer that differently. But I guess what I have found is a whole, you know, set of supportive peers, mentors, you know, senior scholars who are happy to do that. But the job is produce new knowledge that our peers care about. That's a bigger change in the academy. You know, I don't know that I don't know if we want to change that. I think that's an okay, you know, job. I like it. It's a fun job, and I want to do it about this stuff. And I think there's plenty of space for that.
So I think all that I need to do is say thank you to our amazing panelists. I knew you were amazing before coming in. You've just proven to yourselves to be even more amazing, and you and the audience raising these important and interesting questions. I'm profoundly relieved that we didn't spend the entire time debating the definition of grand challenges and the label. And I think this is a testament to substantive engagement with theory and with impact on issues that matter. So hopefully we've inspired you to do that. And Suhaib, would you like to wrap up?
Yeah, thank you everyone. I know we have people busy and rushing off to other sessions, so I won't take much time. But I think one of the things we heard is that this is a collective community. There's a lot of us working under this. This label is really becoming very big and helpful for us to interact. So if you have any feedback, any ideas, any suggestions, you know, just talk to Helen or email Helen or me. And we are hoping to do more iterations of this, so I'm really looking forward to get some feedback from all of you. Okay? Thank you very much.